Hello, I'm Erica from Ever Educating, and this video is part of my Successful Start series. For 5 consecutive weeks, I'm talking all about designing your first week of a college course. The first link below leads you straight to the free workbook I've created for this series. It's over 60 pages long, so make sure to download it if you haven't already. It's right there. On this channel, I'm talking all about how students have responded to the materials I've created for my courses. In my related blog post, I provided examples of those materials, and in the workbook, I lead you step by step through the materials and creating them for your own classes. Even if you're not watching this video during the 5 weeks it's live, you can still download the workbook by clicking the link below. All the links to the materials related to the series can be found inside of the notebook. With all that said, let's get started. Today's video is all about my perception of how my students feel about various elements of my syllabus. Now, a lot of my understanding of how my students feel about the various aspects comes from the course assessment that I curate at the end of the semester. I have a whole blog post and video about that assessment, so I'll make sure to link both of those below in the description box. Student responses to the self-assessment during the first week of class are also considered in how my students provide me feedback that I'm using for this video. And that element will be talked about more in the 5th section of the workbook. But for now, let's focus on how students have responded to these elements of my syllabus and how I've changed them because of that response. First, when creating my instructor information at the top of the syllabus, I started including an email office hours section. I talk about what exactly that means in the workbook, but basically, there are times that I guarantee my students I'll see and respond to their emails. Outside of those hours, I might randomly check my email, but I can't guarantee it as I'm working on my other responsibilities. Now, you might feel anxious about limiting your email hours to a specific time of day. What if your students need you, right? But I feel very strongly it's important to protect the time as a grad student or just as an individual outside of your job in order to maintain a healthy balance. I have an email office hour at the beginning and end of each day, so basically my students are guaranteed multiple opportunities to speak to me each day of the week. Since most college courses are designed to take place every other day, they definitely have 2, if not more, chances to get in contact before we meet for the next time. If they do happen to email me on the day of a class period after 10 a.m., then I might not get back to them on time before that class, but considering they waited so long, I feel that they could always ask me in class or I'll answer it after we finish that period. I always make a point to emphasize my email hours when going over the syllabus so they understand exactly what that means, because it's something pretty new to them. I always receive top marks about the student eval question about how available I was outside of class. I just make a point to emphasize in my class periods that I'm always available in my office hours, by appointment, or via email if they make sure to maintain that schedule. When going through your required and optional texts and tools the first day, I definitely suggest giving students extra information on when they'll need or potentially want to use those materials. For example, I let my English 170 students know that they don't need any of the books for the first 2 or 3 weeks, but that they'll be using the text multiple times inside and out of class, so they need to have access to them by the time we get to that point. I point out the picture books are the most expensive, so that if they don't want to buy them, they can look at their local libraries instead. So if the books you're teaching can be easily found in libraries, I definitely suggest telling your students that, so they know they might not need to buy it if they don't need to. They'll make sure to emphasize that they'll need it in class as soon as possible if it's necessary for that next week or so. Since I teach literature courses, I've had students come up to me after class and tell me that they're worried about their reading list because they're slow readers. So while my main response to that concern is that they should start reading as soon as possible and take notes and annotate the text so they had that backup, I recently started telling students about audiobooks and library access in that way as well. Most public libraries have an app or at least a website with free audiobooks in their system. I recommend Access 360 myself, but I'm sure there's others as well, depending on what library you're a part of. While students might need to cite specific scenes in those texts, they can cite the time in the audiobook rather than a page number, and that's fine with me. For optional class materials, I always recommend bringing a laptop or tablet to class so that students can follow along with any PowerPoint lectures or digital materials that I go over. I assign a lot of digital stuff in the public domain so students don't have to buy them, like fairy tales, for example. But remembering the details can be difficult if they don't have the access to it in class. While they can print it out, I tell them to just bring their laptop or tablet, or even their phone, with the readings, so they can use those instead. If you're worried students will just use a laptop to go on Facebook or Amazon, just tell them that they can lose the opportunity to use their laptop or tablet in class if you notice not respecting the policy of using technology responsibly. But personally, as long as they're not disrupting other students, I feel it's up to them to keep track of themselves. If they want to miss important information that's happening in class, that's on them. I don't tend to get too many students who just roam the internet in class, but that's because in my literature courses, most of the class time is spent focusing on discussing the text. It'd look weird and very obvious if they were paying attention to their screen rather than looking up while we talk about the class materials. In my computer lab courses, my writing courses, computer use is more of an issue. So to help mitigate that, I suggest walking around behind your students or near their desks so they know that they should be working if they aren't already. For the grade breakdown, you'll be using the breakdown given to you by your institution. But like I mentioned in the workbook, you might include a short notice underneath it about whether or not you round up grades. I often include a note that I don't round them up because I offer so many extra credit opportunities. Students have until the last day of class to complete them, so it's on them to do the extra work if they notice that their grade is on the border from an A to a B, B to a C, etc. I still might end up rounding up the grades, but on my syllabus, I tell them explicitly that I don't plan to do so because of the extra credit. If you're unsure what types of extra credit activities to offer, I do have a whole blog post with ideas for you, and so I'll link that below in the description box. A lot of my students take me up on the option of doing the extra credit activities, so I've never taught a class without that chance. If you're going to do so, I suggest putting in your syllabus that you do not believe in extra credit, and so you will not be offering those opportunities throughout the class period. As such, they need to make sure to keep track of their grade and improve as the semester continues if they see that they're getting a grade lower than what they want to receive in that class. Finally, your policy section of the syllabus might differ heavily than my own because they are so course and instructor specific. I just recommend that you take the time to go over them in class, even if you don't read them word for word. Students often have questions about this portion of the syllabus. I often get asked whether or not I look at drafts before assignments are due, for example. So in later semesters, I include that policy into my syllabus, letting them know that yes, I'm happy to look at their drafts, but they must see me in person. They can't just email me a draft and expect my thoughts, because at that point, you might get tons of emails the day before an assignment is due. So while only a few students take me up on this option, those students tend to see me multiple times for multiple assignments. So I'm really glad I have this policy now because it really shows me how some students really invest in improving their skills with the help of the instructor. All right, I'm going to stop here, but if you have any questions or concerns, let me know in the comment section below. I'll make sure to answer them as soon as I can. And if you have your own advice about creating the syllabus and going over it in class, please do feel free to share. All right, and once you finish your first draft of your syllabus, go ahead and click that like button so I know that you're ready to move on to the next section of the workbook and the series. I'll see you next week.